It's the player profile and review of Tom Wilson next on this edition of Locked On Capitals.
Your Locked On Capitals, your daily podcast on the Washington Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Well, hello and welcome into this edition of Locked On Capitals. I'm so glad you decided to join me today. As always, this podcast is free and available on all the major platforms, including the SiriusXM app and on YouTube. And I want to thank you for making this your first listen each and every day. My name is Dan Holme. You can find me on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at Locked On Caps. And the best way grow the show, subscribe to Locked On Capitals on YouTube, and comment anything down below. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/locked-on to get started. So in this edition of Locked On Capitals, we talk about number 43, Tom Wilson, and what he means to this team. It's not often that you find a player that's a good goal scorer, has a good physical touch, and a leader. Tom Wilson encompasses all of those things and is what makes him a dynamic player. We'll talk about that a little bit later. We will talk about the 2023-24 season in review, the highs and lows, and what that meant for Tom Wilson. After that, we will talk about the big contract that Tom Wilson signed last summer. And then in the last segment, we'll talk about the history of Tom Wilson and where he got his start from. But just to get it going here, we'll talk about the 23-24 season in review, and ultimately how I thought it was a season of growth for Tom Wilson, as he was not the player that dropped the gloves all the time. Just because another player wanted him to, he showed more restraint this last season. And in Mike Vogel's podcast, he realized and said that he's best served being on the ice, helping his team score goals, not sitting in the penalty box. So just because there's some fourth line AHL call-up guy that wants to make a name for himself, or a player like Matt Rempe, he doesn't need to drop the gloves against him unless, the situation calls for it. There are certain situations where you can kind of change the momentum of a game by dropping the gloves, but he's getting wiser and smarter and all of those things the older he gets, and quite a dynamic player. In the 23-24 season, Tom Wilson experienced a roller coaster journey filled with a myriad of experiences that contributed to both personal and professional growth. Throughout his 11th season in the NHL, Wilson encountered a series of highs and lows, both on and off the ice, which he described as one of the most eventful and transformative periods of his career. And some of the things that changed is the fact that, you saw Nick Backstrom step away from hockey. You saw TJ Oshie and all that he dealt with his back. And all of a sudden, Tom Wilson is kind of getting put on the front burner as one of the leaders of the team. I think for the longest time, he thought of himself as one of the younger guys on the team. And, you got Backstrom and Oshie and those guys. Those are the elders of the team. Those are the leaders. But how he took on more of a leadership role in the absence of some of those players. Taking a look at it in the wake of Backstrom's departure, Wilson embraced his role as a leader, garnering recognition from his teammates for his ability to seamlessly transition into a prominent leader position. Team captain Alex Ovechkin commended Wilson's leadership, describing him as a consistent presence both on and off the ice, and expressing confidence in his potential to assume a future captaincy role. So even Alex Ovechkin sees the significance and what he meant for this team. He sees the writing on the wall that at some point he is going to hang up the skates, and he even sees the leadership in Wilson. Wilson's season was marked by a series of notable events, including enduring a broken nose, earning his second NHL All-Star appearance, and being on the receiving end of a nasty high stick that left a visible scar. We all remember that and how he wanted to battle on. However, amidst these changes, Wilson emphasized the significance of growth he experienced. He highlighted the impact of the team's dynamics, including the arrival of a new head coach and cohort of young players, as well as the departure of veteran players Nicholas Backstrom. Wilson's role expanded as he stepped into a leadership position, assuming the responsibility of one of the team's alternate captains, and kind of, in a lot of ways, already taking on that captain role. I know that Alex Ovechkin still wears that C on his chest, but it's also kind of, I'm starting to see the power shift over to Tom Wilson. That, Alex Ovechkin is still in name the captain, but Tom Wilson is starting to take on more of that leadership role as Alex Ovechkin is kind of on the back nine of his hockey career. And I think that ultimately he is doing an excellent job. We know the leadership that there were a lot of young players on the Capitals this last season with McMichael, LaPierre, Malenstein, those kind of players that sometimes you need that veteran voice. And he's not so old on the team that, he's not relatable. I think that you take a look at Tom Wilson, he's just old enough that he has the ability to be kind of the guy that the young guys look up to, but maybe Alex Ovechkin to a certain extent is almost too old for some of the players to relate to. In addition to his leadership responsibilities, Wilson has relied upon to provide offensive contributions and serve as a catalyst for the team. His impact extended into the playoffs, where he led the team in scoring during the series against the New York Rangers. A dynamic player. And oftentimes we hear people, compare him to a Reeves or a Maroon or a Matt Rempe. But I don't think that's really the case. And if you want to take a look at the back of all of those players' hockey cards, none of those players put up the kind of numbers that Tom Wilson does as far as goals scored, as far as assists, those kind of things. And sometimes it's not the things that are easily quantifiable, like, the leadership role or being the intimidator on the ice. You can't put a number on intimidation factor. But, oftentimes I think of situations where all Tom Wilson has to do is skate into a vicinity and things kind of disperse. So that is something, that doesn't show up in deep analytics or on the back of a hockey card. Those are the things that you just have to know. If you know what kind of player Tom Wilson is. However, Wilson's season was not without adversity, as he faced a 6-game suspension following an incident that caught the attention of the NHL Department of Player Safety. Despite the setback, Wilson expressed pride in the team's growth and cohesion, stressing the importance of accountability and the collective drive of the players. He highlighted the team's ability to rally together, secure victories against formidable opponents, and adapt to changing roles, emphasizing the significance of collective growth, maturity, and increased experience among the players. Ultimately, Wilson reflected on the season as a period of significant personal and collective development, attributed to the team's success to their resiliency, unity, and unwavering support of one another. And that was true. I think, and I heard this from Connor McMichael and a lot of the younger guys on the team, that it felt like they grew up this past season on the Capitals. And I think some of that was, taking on a bigger role on an NHL team. Of course, some of that had to do with what they did last season with the Hershey Bears and winning a Calder Cup, that they were put through their paces and found a way to rise above and win the Calder Cup. But it was a team that grew together. It wasn't just the old guys on the team. It wasn't just the young guys. It was the perfect mixture of veteran and young players working together. And ultimately, that is what I see this team being in the fall. I think they will hopefully make some key additions with some young players and some veteran players as well. But when all of those players are here, it's going to be the voices of Tom Wilson and players like that will lead the charge. And I think, you take a look at Tom Wilson, I think that just intrinsically, he's a leader. He's the alpha type. He's a guy that speaks with scoring goals. He is a guy that will speak with his fists if called upon, but also a guy that just kind of carries himself as a leader. And I think that is why I've thought, and if you're an everydayer of the show, I've talked about for years that I see Tom Wilson being the next captain of this team. And it's a pretty common thought nowadays. Most people kind of see it. Even the current captain, Alex Ovechkin, sees it. So just a real season of growth is what I'm going to say about Tom Wilson. Like I talked about off the top there, that you don't need to always engage with fights with everyone, that, trust your skill set. I think that oftentimes when you see players that aren't multidimensional, like a Reeves, players like that, that they feel that they have to rely on the tough guy thing. And there's a time and place for that. But if you have a skill set that involves scoring goals, then you don't need to just be that junkyard dog. All right, so coming up here straight ahead, we will talk about the Tom Wilson contract and how that was kind of a scary moment for Capitals fans. There was the thought that potentially Tom Wilson could be on the move. Let's take a look back on that contract and what that meant for Wilson and the Caps straight ahead. It's winner take all in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel's giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. So, say you are watching the NBA playoffs, say that you are watching the Nationals play and you're not that into it. Say the teams that you're watching aren't doing that well. Well, grab your phone, open up the FanDuel app, put a little bit of money on the game. All of a sudden, the game is that much more exciting. So visit fanduel.com/locked on and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all the shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports today brings you the can't miss analysis, opinions, news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It is your team. It is every day. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So in this segment, we're going to talk about the Tom Wilson contract. And generally speaking, I'm not a fan of long deals, expensive contracts, contracts that are many years, but I am going to make an exception for certain players, and Tom Wilson is one of them. I think that I don't need to see any more. I don't think that the Capitals are waiting to see if he's going to grow into the player that they had hoped. I think that he is what he is, and he is one dynamic player. Why not lock up the potential future captain of the team for the long term? And that is exactly what Brian McClellan and the Capitals did. The Capitals have reached a 7-year, $45.5 million contract agreement with forward Tom Wilson. The team announced the new deal will keep Wilson on the team through the 2030-2031 season with an average annual value of $6.5 million. They backed up the Brinks truck to Tom Wilson's house, and guess what? He is deserving of every single penny. Now, there are two sides of every coin. I've heard the detractors talk about it, that, what kind of player do you think he's going to be in season 2028 or 2029? Listen, all contracts nowadays, there is inherent risk with all of them. What I know for sure is the player that we have right now is worth the risk. You see like the Pierre-Luc Dubois deal. You see other deals where players just got locked up for many, many years that don't have the numbers to back them up. Tom Wilson has the numbers to back it up, and it's not often that I agree with such exorbitant contracts like the one that Tom Wilson signed. But make no mistake about it, I would have done the exact same thing that Brian McClellan did. And there was a bit of worry. And where did that emanate from? I talked about it, that it was last summer, the previous summer, before he signed a contract. They were talking about on breakdown day about his future. And at that time, he hadn't signed a contract. And, he said that he for sure wanted to retire as a Capital, and that all sounded good. But then he entered in certain comments that said, stranger things have happened. And, part of me at the time was thinking about, is he entertaining the thought of potentially leaving? I know that you have to put on the face of the team that you're playing for and say, of course, I want to retire on the team that I'm playing for. But when he inserted the words that stranger things have happened. And then I saw Stephen Wino on the Daily Faceoff talking about that he was one of the players that even he thought could be on the move. And Stephen Wino is not just a nobody. He is a writer for the Associated Press. So, when he says stuff, I know that at the end of the day, he was just kind of pontificating and guessing like the rest of us are. But it was interesting that he kind of drew that comparison. But all of that doesn't matter as he signed a 7-year deal with the Capitals. Despite earlier rumors that Wilson's future with the Caps, the team and the player were committed to reaching a long-term deal. Wilson expressed his honor and excitement about the extension, emphasizing his dedication to the team and city. Capitals senior vice president and GM Brian McClellan praised Wilson's contributions and leadership qualities, highlighting his value to the organization. Again, a key piece. I'm going to go ahead and say probably the biggest player on the team. And some people are like, wow, Dan really kind of just went out on a ledge there. But take a look at it. And what do I mean when I say that? Alex Ovechkin is a huge piece for this team, but we know that he only has a few years left, potentially playing in the NHL. And we've seen diminished returns in his play last season. I know that he turned it on in the second half of the season, but I think, if you were, searching your heart of hearts, you know what I'm talking about, that Tom Wilson is kind of taking on that upper echelon marquee name of the team. TJ Oshie, back problems. Nick Backstrom stepped away from hockey indefinitely. John Carlson, a dynamic blue liner defenseman, but I still don't think quite garners what Tom Wilson does. So that's the position, is that in a lot of face, Tom Wilson right now is the current face of the franchise. I know Alex Ovechkin, chasing Gretzky, the current captain, but I think the transition in power is already kind of in place. For Alex Ovechkin to tip his hat to Tom Wilson and say, yeah, he has those leadership qualities, I think that is ultimately why Brian McClellan and the Capitals did what they did, and a 7-year deal. That is quite a vote of faith and confidence. According to Wilson's agent, preliminary talks for an extension began at the end of the previous season, with discussions picking up early last month. This was from last summer, and accelerating over the past 2 weeks. The agent dismissed earlier trade rumors as fiction and emphasized the importance of securing and an extension well in advance to avoid unnecessary pressure and media speculation. And I partook in media speculation, guilty as charged. And it was one of the things that Brian McClellan doesn't often get too irritated about, but he was quite irritated about it. And I think that it was Tarek El-Bashir that brought it up before Wilson signed his new contract, and Max said, quit bringing it up. I don't know who keeps bringing this up, but I want it to stop right here. And Brian McClellan is a former player, and one of his teammates said that when you see the look on his face that he said, who's bringing this up, quit bringing it up, that when you see that serious face, you better take him serious, because he's only seen it a couple times before. And right after that, things went pretty bad. So when Brian McClellan gets real and he gets serious, that was one of those situations. And it's interesting that a former player that he played with brought that up. But in any event, I think that is why the Capitals wanted to wrap that up as quickly as they possibly could, because of the speculation and the potential of, hey, are there going to be other teams kicking the tires on him? Are there going to be people, making offers on Tom Wilson? So I think ultimately that is why that was done. But we don't need to worry about it in this episode. As I'm recording this in May, I'm merely just reflecting on a time, a player, a review and profile of one of the best players in the NHL. And I believe that. I honestly believe that Tom Wilson is one of the best players in all of the NHL. You take a look at Connor McDavid. You take a look at Alex Ovechkin. You take a look at a lot of other players. They are great goal scorers, yes. But Tom Wilson is not quite that goal scorer. He's still a great goal scorer, but he has a lot more different things to his game than those players don't. I don't think that there's a lot of players out there that fear Connor McDavid is going to drop the mitts and want to fight him. Or, you take a look at or Artemi Panarin or Zibanejad, some of those kind of players, that they have that high skill set. But Wilson has the goal scoring touch, maybe not as good as the players I mentioned, but he has the physicality, the leadership, and the ability to change the momentum of games. That is quite a Swiss Army knife that I think that any other team in the NHL would love to have. And we're just lucky enough as Capitals fans to say that he is on our team. All right, so coming up here straight ahead, we will talk about the history of Tom Wilson, how he got his start, and how he worked his way up through the Capitals organization. I'll discuss straight ahead. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So time does fly. That is something that is apparent to me as a guy that's 47 years old, that time seems to move quicker the older that you get. And it comes real apparent when I start thinking about players that I saw them playing in their rookie season, and all of a sudden, wow, they've been in the league for over a decade, in some cases 2 decades. And it really starts making you feel older. In some cases, it's like, yeah, it seems like it's been that long. But in the case of Tom Wilson, it really doesn't seem that he's been in the league, playing on the Capitals in the NHL for as long as he has. It's just interesting how age kind of distorts your perceptions of reality in a lot of ways. But taking a look back on Tom Wilson, a Toronto native, he began his hockey career at a young age and transitioned from a playing defense to a forward. Despite facing injuries early in his junior career, he gained recognition in the 2012 year and won the Ross Robertson Cup playoffs. He then joined the Washington Capitals for the 2013 Stanley Cup playoffs. So this is a guy that has been playing in the league, and he's been playing hockey for quite some time. Got his start playing up in Toronto. Known for his aggressive playing style, Wilson became an enforcer on the Capitals' fourth line during the 2013-2014 NHL season, despite facing criticism for his physical play and receiving fines and suspensions. He shifted his focus towards goal scoring and achieved career highs in goals and points during the 18-19 season. Wilson's size and physicality made him an appealing prospect, leading to the selection by the Plymouth Whalers in the 2010 OHL priority selection. He was drafted 16th overall by the Caps in the 2012 NHL entry draft and has since become a pivotal figure within the team, playing a crucial role in their historic Stanley Cup victory. Taking a look at him, and he was huge for the Capitals. He got kind of jumped out of the frying pan and into the fire with the Capitals and made an impression early. In some of his earliest years with the Capitals, what was apparent is he wanted to lead with a physical edge, and subsequently that led to suspensions, that led to, the NHL players getting involved quite a bit. And I think with age, like I talked about in the previous segment, he has since matured. Since his debut in the 2013-2014 season, Wilson has shown steady growth and development, with improvements in his offensive performance and increased ice time and point totals each season. His success continued into the 2021-22 season, where he set new career highs in goals, assists, and points, and was selected to represent the Capitals at the 2022 NHL All-Star Game. The accolades, the accomplishments started to roll the older he got. In the 2022-23 season, Wilson had a productive year, recording 13 goals and 9 assists in 74 regular season games and leading the team in scoring in the playoffs. Throughout his career, Wilson has evolved into a multifaceted player known for his offensive acumen and physical presence, solidifying his position as a cornerstone of the Capitals' future success and current success. And that has been kind of the common theme of this episode, is talking about the impact of Tom Wilson and what he has meant to this team for years. And with his new contract, it will be for a lot more years. Through the 74 regular season games in the 23-24 season, the 29-year-old had 18 goals and 17 assists for 35 points, along with 133 penalty minutes. In the playoffs, he led the team in scoring with 3 points in 4 games against the New York Rangers. Tom Wilson was one of the guys. There wasn't a lot of standouts. I'm going to go ahead and say in the playoffs this past season, Tom Wilson was one of the guys that tried to drag this team across the finish line as best that he could. Listen, Alex Ovechkin was covered. He didn't seem like he was that interested at certain points. Tom Wilson showed his leadership, and ultimately what we're talking about when we say future captain, it's moments like that that Wilson, even though he wasn't able to get it done himself, did his level best to try and drag this team across the finish line. The progression of Wilson's offensive capabilities has been particularly noteworthy, with each season showcasing a marked improvement in his performance. And taking a look at him throughout his career, Wilson's impact on the ice has transcended traditional metrics, as he has constantly demonstrated an innate ability to elevate the team's performance throughout his offensive acumen and physical presence. His evolution into a multifaceted player has not only bolstered the Caps lineup, but also cemented his position as a cornerstone of the team's future success. And here, I do believe that, and we're, thankful for all the years that he's been on this team, and kind of anxiously awaiting to see what he will bring in the coming years, as this team is transitioning from a really old team to slowly going into the direction of a younger team. And we don't know what it's going to look like when it all shakes out. We don't know when Leonard is going to be able to join this team, when Andrew Crystal is going to be able to join this team, and how dynamic of a team is this going to be with Ryan Leonard and Tom Wilson on the same team together. Two guys that have similar characteristics, not an apples for apples comparison, but similar characteristics, that this team is going to be markedly better in years to come. And they will be markedly better with the leadership of players like Tom Wilson, and players that will come up through the ranks and kind of be the younger version of Tom Wilson. And it's an exciting time to be a Capitals fan as we see this team evolve into, just a different phase. 4 years, it was Nick Backstrom and Alex Ovechkin, kind of the faces of the franchise for a long time. Well, we saw Backstrom step away, and Alex Ovechkin, we don't know. He's got 2 to 3 years left, I'm going to go ahead and say, in the NHL, depending on what he wants to do with his future. That it's time to take a look at the future. And I think that the leader of the team going forward is going to kind of transition from Alex Ovechkin and Nick Backstrom to players like Tom Wilson and the other players that to kind of step up and take on those leadership roles. But in this episode, that is what we're talking about, is just kind of a celebration of a really great player on this team, and how lucky we should all feel as Capitals fans that we have a player like Tom Wilson on this team. Listen, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, your only daily year-round podcast covering the Washington Capitals. And I want to thank all of you that listen on the audio side and watch this on YouTube. You are ultimately what makes this show successful. When you're done here, head on over to Locked On's 24/7 streaming channel, available on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. All right, once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Dan Holme, and I'll talk to you again next time.